Good evening and good morning to you all, and welcome to Better Food, the next chapter in the Better Future Forum series brought to you by Forward Democracy. My name is Peter, your co-host for this evening, and before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to get acquainted with the chat box. Let us know where you're joining from, what's buzzing in your mind as you arrive, and do pop questions and thoughts in there as they arise throughout the event. Also, feel free to have a play with the layout. For example, you can see more people in gallery mode, and you can find that button in the top right of your screen, and there's a slider in the middle you can adjust to see more of the slide and whatnot. So right, very quickly, who are Forward Democracy? We are a non-profit organisation that has been working to create a path to a better democracy in the UK since 2017. We passionately believe that democracy's ongoing improvement is absolutely critical as it underpins all of society's intricate and interconnected challenges, such as education, health, and of course, food. To our minds, it's simple. Better political decision-making benefits everyone. And I'll touch more on that towards the end. So the Better Future Forum is our monthly ideas exchange, showcasing pioneers who are building a future that thrives in tune with people and the planet. And today we're looking at better food. So food is about as personal as it gets, and therefore hugely political. What are we doing right? Where are we getting it wrong? And how can we build a better system? And joining us to explore some of these themes and more are Jamie Crummie, the co-founder of Too Good To Go, Lynne Davis, the chief executive of the Open Food Network, Michelle Sullivan, co-founder of the Artisan Grower, and Tim Lang, professor of food policy at the Centre for Food Policy at the City University of London. Before we go to our first speaker, I'm delighted to introduce our co-host and subject matter expert this evening, Ylva Johannesson. Based in the Netherlands, Ylva works with food-led businesses, governments and organizations around the world to improve their sustainability credentials and create food systems that are regenerative, nourishing and fair. Did I get that right, Ylva?
Yes, a bit of a tongue twister. Yeah, thanks very much. So really nice to see so many faces and some familiar faces too. So in my consultancy approach, I take a very integrated and systems-based approach, which is rooted in science. So I use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the planetary boundaries as reference frameworks. So that includes both social and environmental issues. And as we know, the food system is complex, but we are actually running out of time to fix it. The way we produce and consume food is highly unsustainable. As we all know, that's why we're here. 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries have been exceeded, including climate change and biodiversity. 1/3 of food grown and produced is wasted. And diet-related disease, including obesity and heart disease, is a leading cause of death globally. And according to WWF's Living Planet report, nearly 1 million animal and plant species are threatened with extinction, mainly due to deforestation and overfishing. And the food system also contributes to more than 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. So the trajectory of keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius rise is not looking good unless we dramatically reduce carbon emissions starting now. So excitingly, this year is an important year for food, and the very first United Nations Food Systems Summit is taking place in the autumn, as well as the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity, and later this year, the United Nations Climate Change Summit in Glasgow. So this will have implications for UK policy as well, and a very good opportunity to set a clear ambition with targets for a better and more integrated food system from local to global. And we all have a role to play. And I look forward to hearing the future food visions from today's speakers.
Thanks, Ylva. Right, so coming up first, we have Lynne Davis. Lynne's purpose and passion is to build global food sovereignty. She spent the last decade understanding food systems, working as a commercial farmer, reclaiming land as an activist, establishing community farming projects, researching in policy think tanks, and campaigning in agricultural unions. As chief executive of the Open Food Network UK, Lynne combines this experience with degrees in software engineering and agricultural economics to build regional food systems that serve people and planet in the UK and globally. Over to you, Lynne.
Cool, thanks very much. Yeah, well, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation and thanks for coming and listening, everyone. So I'm Lynne Davis and I'm part of the Open Food Network. And I'm just going to take a minute to start to talk about what the Open Food Network is. So we're a global collaboration building open source software and resources to support community food enterprises. So that, we work with food enterprises that are driven by their communities and that have social and ecological values at their core. And then we help these enterprises to grow online, to coordinate regionally, and to streamline their admin and processes. So the community food enterprise sector, it's an interesting sector, mostly because food has such low margins. So community food enterprises aim to make good quality food affordable. And that's a really hard problem to solve. So they tend to be incredibly innovative. They generally leverage community assets, maybe like a school or a town hall. And then they combine, they're generally run by staff and volunteers in combination. Often they have really complex delivery networks where maybe neighbors are collecting for each other or neighboring farms are dropping things off. And so the economic dogma would call this kind of business inefficient. But it's exactly this diversity and flexibility that makes these kind of enterprises incredibly resilient, and why, this is why community food enterprises is at the core of my vision for what the food system could look like. So, this resilience really came into its own in the drama that was 2020. In the first lockdown, we saw 900% growth in the space of a few weeks. And community food enterprises at this time, they just proved to be so remarkably resilient and adaptable. While supermarket shelves were emptying, community food enterprises were on the phone to farmers. They knew who nearby them was supplying the local pub. And when the pub closed, they knew that that farmer would need another outlet, a retail outlet. So they could divert that surplus supply directly into retail because of the relationships that they had already. When vulnerable people couldn't leave their houses and they couldn't get delivery services from supermarkets, community food enterprises were on the phone contacting these folks who were in their communities and making sure that they had enough food to eat. And when the demand exploded overnight, community food enterprises were recruiting their furloughed neighbors to come and help do the deliveries and pack the boxes. Every single order was filled during the first lockdown and continues to be so. So this incredible responsiveness and resilience of these communities is impossible to ignore. Last year also thrust the extreme inequalities in our society into plain sight as a huge number of people fell through the cracks in support packages, food bank usage skyrocketed, families relying on school meals were suddenly missing out on this invaluable source of nutrition. What I've been most excited about is how community food enterprises have responded to this. All the enterprises we work with have been actively working to address food inequality problems. So this means having products available for donation, maybe a pay it forward veg box, or, this is something we've seen in Birmingham and Cornwall. Some have been taking monetary donations and then making these donations available as vouchers to folks who need it. And these vouchers can be redeemed in a way that gives full choice to the recipient for the very same high quality food through this food enterprise, So it's incredibly dignified response, truly dignified and redistributive mechanism that's existing within the ecosystem that is this social enterprise, this community. Or there's a Freezer of Love project in Stroud in which anyone can collect a nutritious frozen meal at any time from the freezer. Some people would buy them, some people would pay it forward, and others take it for free because they need it. So I'm just incredibly excited about all these innovations that are happening across the country to address food access issues, mostly because they're being driven by their communities. They're implemented in ways that build trust and respect and dignity. They bring people together. I'm also really excited about the shared learning that's happening between all of these community organizations. As everyone is experimenting and finding things that work and then telling other people, and someone will innovate a bit more, and then they can start to scale these responses. This peer-to-peer learning is a hotbed of innovation, and it's all driven by these communities, by the values these communities have themselves. So one of the things we were asked to talk about is our vision for a better food system. And I think at the heart of mine, it's diversity, diversity, diversity. I said it 3 times because I'm taking a triple bottom line diversity stance: social diversity, economic diversity, and ecological diversity. Ecological diversity, probably we're quite familiar with this, right? Like on farms, how can we maximize the amount of life? Trees, hedgerows, soil microfauna, diversity of crops, habitats. You know, our goal should be the most possible life that we can fit onto a farm. Social diversity, how can we build social enterprises and projects that include as many perspectives as possible so that our food systems give everyone access to culturally appropriate, nutritious, ecologically produced food, you know, for every single meal. But I think the important key to all of this is economic diversity. I think a lot of our problems stem from the fact that we live in an economic monoculture. You know, about 95% of food retail goes through 8 supermarkets. That's 8 CEOs deciding how everyone should eat. That's absurd. 13% of jobs in the UK economy are in the agri-food sector. The agri-food sector is full of low-paid workers. Many are in precarious positions, and many have been hit hard in the past 12 months. Imagine if all of these people were building community food enterprises that, you know, had their values at their core, that were putting their own communities first. So building community food enterprise sector, basically it needs investment. It needs investment in appropriate scale and collaborative technologies and interoperable systems that can enable coordination and delivery logistics and circular economy approaches to waste and packaging, food processing at appropriate scale, such that smaller market gardens can supply procurement contracts, and producers of every scale can access appropriate processing facilities. So I realize I just said a whole lot of jargon, but the fact of the matter is there are tried and tested solutions out there that exist. They simply need nurturing and supporting. And hopefully in the next section, I can unpack some of that jargon a little bit. But yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating, Lynne. It's yeah, the experience you have in terms of, you know, building these communities with farmers, with citizens is so important. And I think food inequality is definitely one of the most important issues to solve today. Everyone should have access to nutritious, healthy food that is culturally appropriate, and that must be on top of policy agendas around the world. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lynne. Right, so next up we have Jamie Crummie. Jamie is a man on a mission to fight food waste. He is the co-founder of Too Good To Go, the world's largest marketplace for surplus food. The food app lets consumers buy unsold food from restaurants and retailers so that it doesn't go to waste. It's now active in 15 countries with over 29 million users who have rescued over 60 million meals collectively. Take it away, Jamie.
Thank you very much for the introduction there, Peter. I mean, you've pretty much done my job for me. But yes, I'm Jamie Crummie, one of the co-founders of Too Good To Go, which is a social impact company all around fighting food waste. Now, we like to dream big. You know, our vision really is of a planet with no food waste, and our mission is to inspire and empower people along the way. Yeah, when we're talking about food waste and the scale and gravity of the issue, I mean, over a third of food produced ends up being wasted. You know, this has profound effects from a social, a financial, and environmental side of things. You know, when we're looking at it from a financial perspective, not only is food waste costing us as individuals a lot of money, it's costing the global purse around about $1.2 trillion every single year, which is roughly the size of the 15th largest global economy, Mexico. So, you know, it really doesn't make sense. And there's these social implications as well. You know, there's around about 870 million people going to bed hungry every single year, yet there's more than enough food being produced to feed everyone. So, you know, food waste is the real social injustice from this perspective. But I and Too Good To Go, we very much look at food waste through the lens of environmentalism. You know, we're in a climate emergency at the moment, and as Ylva has mentioned, you know, we have some really pressing conferences coming up, whether it's COP26 or the like. But the time now is to act, and you know, around between 8 to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from food waste. You know, that's not food production, that's food that's wasted. And what that means is that if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter after the US and China. So this is the mission that we're on here with Too Good To Go. And typically people tend to know us through our mobile platform. So as Peter said, we connect consumers with businesses who have surplus food. And this is essentially a marketplace. And what we're trying to do here is change people's attitudes and change people's behaviors when it comes to food waste. Really bring food waste into the public discourse and get people talking about it. It's around giving people a tangible tool in which they can physically go and start fighting food waste whilst helping the environment at the same time. You know, the numbers have been said already, but you know, it demonstrates a scalable movement towards fighting food waste. You know, we are in 15 markets globally, having just launched in the US. And we work with over 60,000 different food businesses, which range from your local cafe to your high street chain of some description, through to various different retailers, hotels, food producers, and in some instances farmers as well. So this is a scalable solution to fight food waste and bring about positive change. And I guess what we're trying to do here, you know, as I mentioned, our vision really is about a planet with no food waste, in which we can inspire and empower people to fight food waste together. Because at the crux of this is doing things collaboratively. You know, we have to work together to really change the way in which we in which our relationship with food is, and the way in which we engage with it. So on that note, it's all about developing this movement around food waste. So outside our platform, you know, we do work alongside the businesses that we work with. It's inspiring and empowering households. It's working with schools. So everyone from learning their ABCs through to doing their PhDs, trying to inspire these, whilst at the same time working within public affairs to try and, you know, spark some policy change around food waste. So this is the movement in which we're trying to galvanize and generate to, as I say, change behaviors and change attitudes towards food and start preventing food waste.
Thanks, Jamie. Really interesting. As you say, food waste has economic, environmental, and social implications. It really is a no-brainer to stop wasting food. It's taking a lot of land, a lot of soil nutrients, farmers' time, emissions from transportation to produce this food, and throwing it away is really shameful. And the food industry, as you say, certainly has a big role to play in addressing this issue, and you're doing a fantastic job of not only highlighting that, but also providing a solution to that problem. So very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good. Thank you, Jamie. I was lucky to have been raised really despising food waste, and I get really angry with myself if even a scrap goes in the bin. Yeah, a lot of that really resonates. Thank you so much. I'm delighted next to introduce Michelle Sullivan, who I actually first came across in the news last year for being featured in a Jay-Z music video. Sharing an avid love for vegan and organic produce is what planted the seed for Michelle and Robert Sullivan's new business venture, the Artisan Grower. Starting off as a hobby, their inch-based vegetable growing company has since seen its products distributed all over Scotland. The couple take great pride in their alternative method of growing, which allows them to provide an extensive variety of delicious, seasonal and sustainable fruit and vegetable types while selling directly to the consumer. Please tell us more, Michelle. What's your vision for the future?
Yeah.
How's it going?
Okay, yeah, I will do. Sounds like you've kind of summed it all up there, really. But yeah, that's exactly what we do. You know, we just decided that we would do our little bit, you know, and I think that's really the point, that if every individual makes a personal change themselves, I think we can start to see, you know, the domino effect of that. And so for us ourselves, actually, it just started out that we just wanted to grow for our family. you know, but when you grow for your family, you find that other people, like, you know, they're not satisfied with what they get from the supermarket, whether it's, you know, the tomatoes that you could probably play tennis with, or, you know, things like that. Folks are sort of saying, you know, they actually want to be able to taste a tomato for what it is. And so, you know, our growing kind of led from there, really. Folks, you know, would want something that comes from, you know, the ground, that is local and seasonal and actually full of flavor. It's not commercially grown, you know. We feed the soil, as mentioned, veganically, which basically means that, you know, we don't use any kind of animal input. We don't use, you know, cow manure or horse manure or chicken pellets, blood, meal, bones and feathers and things like that. We tend to use green manure, or green compost, which is basically broken down compost from clippings and things like that. In fact, we have a local supplier of that, so that's pretty good for us. And then we also use things like alfalfa meal to actually fertilize the soil, as well as seaweed and, you know, things like that, as opposed to, you know, what's coming from an animal. So we've kind of cut that section out of our growing, which I think is relatively new concept. Not very many people grow that way. I think if even, you know, folks that are even, you know, vegan or plant-based still grow in a conventional way, which is still bringing the animal food system into our growing, and we're trying to avoid that, really. So what's my vision? Well, you know, my vision actually is to see a lot more people growing. I think if everybody had some space in which that they could grow for themselves, you know, can actually work out, well, how much food does my family need for the year or for the season or whatever? And then actually, you know, take that space, whether it's a patch in the garden or an allotment space, or whether it's actually moving out from a more city environment into a more rural environment, where them and their children could actually grow produce for themselves and actually be able to feed themselves and harvest only what they need, you know. Waste inevitably is something that it cannot, sometimes it just cannot be avoided, especially if you have children that are picky and, you know, they're going to leave something on the plate and it's got to go somewhere. And so I think the thing with growing is that most growers tend to have, you know, an operable compost heap. So it's kind of sustainable in that way. So your veganic or your vegan produce ends up back into it, but it's going to end up back in the soil effectively, because you're going to be putting it into your compost pile, then turns around, and then you have a full cycle starting all over again. And so, you know that what's gone into your compost pile is something that you grew, so it doesn't have any pesticides, doesn't have any sprays, doesn't have anything that we're trying to avoid, any of this sort of chemical damage. So, and then also we don't have the hormones that are coming from the animals, you know, to help, you know, sort of plump them up and things like that. So we know we can have a completely clear conscience when it comes to, you know, what we're putting into our compost pile and what we're actually putting into our bodies. So, you know, my vision is to see more people doing this. You know, we grow and we put out veg boxes that go out to folks in our local region, but, you know, it would be a wonderful thing to actually see families sort of take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and actually do something, you know, a little bit more for themselves, where people can actually take control of their own, you know, food supply chain, so to speak, but they can be their own, you know. So that's really my vision, is to see that happen, and to see a lot more local growers, you know, and not having to rely so much on the supermarkets, you know. And I think it was pretty clear when we had the first lockdown, you know, the supermarkets were unable, it seemed, for whatever reason, to keep up with that supply. You know, I went into some of the supermarkets myself, and I saw many of the shelves completely bare, you know. And so what we found is that around that first lockdown, folks were reaching out, and they were looking to find somewhere else where they can actually get what they couldn't get from the supermarkets. And obviously that affected our sales. Our sales went up, and some other local growers in this region, we checked some of their websites, and they had to actually stop taking you know, subscriptions, because they were just, they couldn't handle the demand, you know. So I think it makes it very clear that there is a hole, there's an issue that needs to be somehow overcome. And I think really it comes back to, you know, the original plan where, you know, men and women, you know, they were placed in, you know, a place where, you know, you have space where you can grow for yourself, where you can take control basically of where your food is coming from, when and how you're going to get it. And even in the summer, when you come, or rather in the autumn, when we come to harvest time, you know, we're actually able to can, I mean, in America they call it canning, I think here is bottling, you know, where we can actually preserve some of that food, whether it's getting a dehydrator and actually dehydrating some of the berries that have come from your garden, whether it's you know, making jams and things. So, you know, just have it, or freezing things even, so that you can have that supply in the winter as well. So I think there's a huge potential if people could really grasp the concept, if we can re-educate folks to actually, you know, get their hands in the soil and roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty, then I think, you know, we could probably overcome a lot of the issues that we have. So that's me.
Thanks, Michelle. So interesting. I must admit that organic growing is a pretty new topic to me. I think I've heard it before, but I've not really explored it or heard it in so much detail. So thanks for sharing. And I think you've clearly responded to this customer demand of seasonal, local, organic produce, and also not using any animal input in that process. And I think also your point on exploring ourselves, what we can grow, and sort of the, you know, the time and value and input it takes to do that, whether that is a herb or a few vegetables, I think is really, really important. And yeah, to finish off your point on supermarkets, I think it's a really relevant discussion to the overall food systems issue that we have. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. It really is a joy to have you here sharing your passion with us. Now, completing our discussion group is world-renowned food policy expert, Professor Tim Lang. Tim has been Professor of Food Policy at City University of London's Centre for Food Policy since 2002, a centre he founded in 1994. Should I stop there, Tim, at the risk of going on, or should I?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, thanks.
I'm an academic, so I tend to do slides. Can you see my slide?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, I just thought it'd be easier than yet another person talking, although I like very much what others have said. Peter asked us to consider two things, excitement and vision. I don't get excited about much, but taking the spirit of what Peter was asking us to consider, I've put down these four things. I am genuinely, I would say, moved actually by the slow rise of democratic experimentation. Not just people doing social enterprises like colleagues have already referred to and do. That's been growing remarkably in the last 20 years, but also literal democratic processes like citizens' juries, assemblies, local groups, local food festivals. There's something very nice and very moving about it, and I think it is actually important. Secondly, there are social movements, as Ylva knows. Well, I've been doing this a long time, 45 years, and in my lifetime, I've seen the just explosion of social movements, particularly in Britain, not just in Britain, but Britain had a flowering of social movements about food in the Thatcher era. It was mainly in response to the fairly brutal politics of the Thatcher era. And I think we'll see more of that today. And I think we are seeing that, some of which I totally disagree with, giving food to the poor and waste food to the poor. But nonetheless, people are moving and thinking and just saying this can't be right. So I get great hope from that. And the third bullet point under excitement, I think there is gradual realization of the complexity of the food system dynamics. People realize it's not just, you know, individual choice, which determines whether people eat or eat well or badly or what happens to the environment. There are some dynamics, there are some very big players. Someone earlier sort of did what is very common, which is to demonize the big supermarkets, and I do that too and have written endlessly about it. But there's more to just the power over the food system than 9 supermarkets, which in Britain control 94.5% of the food retail market. So I think there's a learning that's going on that I find very good, and we all need to learn from each other and share that knowledge. And then fourthly, I think part of that picture is understanding the fault lines. I don't know if you agree with that sort of metaphor. The world of food is like this terrain, this field, but there are fault lines that are really deep across it. And someone referred earlier, I think it was Ylva actually, inequalities. This totally shapes what happens in the food system. You live in Botswana or Birmingham, UK, or Birmingham, Alabama, or Brazil. The inequalities that you cannot talk about food or understand what's going on unless you grasp and see it as a totally unequal system. But cutting across that are very important deep fissures like health, environment, social issues, not just of inequalities, but of culture and aspiration, and of course economics. So those are what, if you like, excite me. They trouble me greatly, but their awareness is growing. In terms of vision that Peter asked us to think on the right-hand side, I think I've just come off a very big meeting. There's a big UN Food Systems Summit happening in September this year, and I'm on an advisory group from one of them. And these are sort of talking shops at one level, but they're more than that. They're seeing the coming together, and little trickles and streams all around the world should be turning into a flood to face the urgency. Because the food system is the biggest user of water, the biggest destroyer of biodiversity, the biggest driver now of ill health, the biggest employer in the world, and so on. And the urgency of needing to sort out the food system isn't just a little problem of Britain and Brexit, although that's our, for those of us in Britain, I know Ylva is not there at the moment, is our critical issue. And if I have, in our masters, when I teach on a masters program, I would always like people to think of the 3 minutes with the minister. I can do it in 30 seconds actually. I would say in the world we need more horticulture. In Britain, dramatically more horticulture, less animals, fewer animals, get animals back into their ecological niche. We need to have a food system which is wrapped around what in my world we call ecological public health, that human health is dependent upon ecosystems health. Equally, ecosystems health need to be reflected in how people eat and what is in the middle of the field, not just at the edge of the field. We need short supply chains. What's happened in the 20th and late 19th century is a rapid extension of supply chains, and Britain, of course, led the way in that with its imperial vision that it didn't want to produce its own food at all and would just get its empire to feed it. But food literally travels more and more, and we certainly need to shorten supply chains, because not just the energy used in that, but it reconnects culture between consumption and production and cuts out totally necessary chains. I mean, you know, the Deliveroo Just Eat world makes more money now than farming does. I mean, that's astonishing. And what is it? Underpaid gig economy people contributing to the software zillionaires in California. We need more primary producers to get more money. In Britain, farming and fishing even less, but farming gets about 5, 6, 7%. If you do it by gross value added, farming gets about 8% of the consumers spent. And consumers in Britain spend £222 billion a year on food and drinks, and farming gets about 11 billion of that. I mean, this is ludicrous. And subsidies are propping up that system. Literally, they hold it up. In Britain, because of Brexit, we're going to be reducing those subsidies. Well, we've got to, in that case, get more money to primary producers. But the big one for me is the cultural shifts. The 20th century has been fantasy world that you can eat what you like, when you like, from where you like in the rich world. And as the world has got richer, which has been a very good thing, because when people are poor, they eat restricted diets, they die early, and so on. So getting richer is actually really good. But as you get richer and richer, you start eating essentially crap. And you get ultra processed foods and non-food foods and unnecessary food and everyday, all the time food, and you get obesity and so on. And we now know the data and the evidence says we've got to rapidly change that, this rather cumbersome term, to aim for sustainable diets. What is a good diet for the 21st century? It'll be different in Botswana to Barden in the UK, but we know it's got to be low carbon, much less food generally, simpler diets, feast day foods on feast days only, we've been eating feast day food all the time, and so on. I don't want to be too crude about that, but the enormity of the cultural shift that's got to happen is central, certainly, to my vision. Back to you, Ylva.
Thanks, Tim. Always fascinating to hear you speak, although I heard you speak many times before. For those who don't know, I had the pleasure of studying the food policy master under Tim a few years ago at City University, which was really, really fascinating and life-changing. So I think, Tim's, your point in sort of needing to understand the power dynamics of the food system is really crucial in order to make change happen. And our system is indeed unequal, but as you say, the rise of the citizens' assemblies and other movements provides some excitement and hope for a better food future and for more sustainable diets. So thank you for that. Shall we go straight into the next question, Pete?
Yeah, I think just before we do that, each of our speakers was invited to consider a call to action, something that they might ask of our community, both tuning in now and potentially later on down the line when this is watched as a replay through our Forward Democracy YouTube channel. So maybe if I could go in reverse order, and it was an invitation, it's not a requirement, but if Tim, maybe if a call to action, maybe we had it at the end there, but I don't want to assume anything, that you would make of this community now and in the future.
Well, I don't know what this community is, Peter, to be really frank, but I will say what I would say to anyone, which is get involved. I don't think fetishize food. It's important, but food merely reflects other dynamics. I think take it very seriously. If this is a group of people, mostly orientally in Britain, we have no policy now. We've left the European Union, which had many restrictions and limitations, and all the 47 years in it, I was in it, but arguing against it and shoving and chipping. We now actually have a void. We've got nothing. We're waiting for an international food strategy. We don't know how that's going to relate to Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales. So there's some very serious straight politics. But I would say the subsidy issue is going to make or break farming. Farming is almost certainly, most of the business analysts are pointing to a huge shed out in farming. If that brought price of land down, good, because we would get better connections and more availability of land, but actually it's the rich who buy land, it's not the poor who buy land. So I'm very interested in a Britain which becomes more bioregional, where it's better hubs, local and regional hubs. It's been playing around on the edge from the 1960s and 70s, my era when I was getting going. But it's still dominated by very powerful players who essentially value extractors rather than value donators. So seize the opportunity of the mess of British politics at the moment to really push hard for it. We've not got it. We've not got a sensible discussion going on. despite the thing that I trying to respond to Peter that he wanted us to be excited about. I am excited about it. I love it. I think my working life has been trying to help and be part of that movement, but it's not enough. I can assure you, we're all over the place at the moment. So I'm very sober indeed.
Thank you, Tim. Michelle, what might your call to action be?
My call to action would be start growing, find a patch, start doing something where you can actually, make a difference on a personal level. It was mentioned that I think it was 6% or something of, the food profits or whatever it is for, I think it's for the UK is going to farming. But, you don't have to have a lot of land, even if you were to grow to supply, your local community, through the research that we've done and through our own experience, a family that grows could easily earn, a 6-figure income on 1 acre of land if they were to be intelligent about how they farm, which, okay, it's a turnover. And I think maybe the profits may be around, I don't know, 40% or something. So, if you want to, you could do 2 acres and, a family could make a good living from, growing food. And as I said, we grow veganically and supplying their local community and also feeding their own family at the same time, so it's a win-win. You can earn money, you can be a part of the community, you can integrate with the public. You know that you're supplying them healthy food, and at the same time you're supplying your own family healthy food. So my call to action would be, go on YouTube, learn how to grow, if you don't do it already. If you're living in a city environment where you don't have space in which to grow, then search out an allotment space or something, get together with some friends, and just get growing. We can sit here and we can, complain about this and complain about that, but we need to do something. We need to actually, I'm not saying folks are complaining, but we need to actually, get our hands in the soil and get growing.
Fair enough.
That's the answer.
Very good. Thank you for that. Jamie, you next, and then we'll go to you, Lynne, and then we'll go into a couple of questions. So yes, Jamie.
Yeah, my call to action is unsurprisingly about engaging people in fighting food waste. And what I didn't mention previously in the context of food waste and the climate emergency we're in, there was the drawdown report, which was published around March last year, and it refers to fighting food waste as one of the most immediate, most impactful solutions that we as individuals can take to reverse the effects of climate change. So in that sense, it's so important for us to embrace the movement of fighting food waste. And simple ways of doing that, without plugging Too Good To Go too much, is of course start rescuing food through platforms like that, but start changing your mindset around food itself. Recognize that food is it's so intrinsic to our own development. It's the social glue that brings us together, and stop viewing it as a commodity in which we can get rid of so frivolously, but as something that is so intrinsic to our development.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And lastly, Lynne, what would your call to action be before we go to a couple of questions?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage everyone who can to support community food businesses as much as possible. Build your own food community, whatever that means to you. To me, it means like building relationships as much as possible with producers, with the people who distribute food, having dinner with people. Obviously, these times aren't so conducive to that, but we can dream for food communities again. And also, just now is such a critical time with the policy that is being debated and the legislation that is going through parliamentary ping pong right now. We had the Ag Bill recently. Right now, we've got the Trade Bill, and the outcomes of these bills will have enormous repercussions on the future of our food system. So, make your voice heard. Have a look at Sustain and other campaigning organizations to find out where the best place to put your voice is.
Brilliant, thank you. What we're going to do is we're going to write all of these call to actions up, and they'll be shared in our follow-up email, which will go out to our mailing list and all those who've attended in the next few days or so. So thank you for that. We had 4 questions sketched out between Ylva and myself, and I don't think we've got time necessarily for all of them, and so and we also want to bring in some questions from the chat box. So first up, on systems, so we've talked of the decentralization and the localization of our food systems and power dynamics, and some of the big issues including food waste and inequalities. So what is a good diet for the 21st century, and what are we to do to sustainably improve our food markets and our access to food? Tim, should we come to you first?
Just remind me of the question as I was trying to answer, Ashish. Was it about consolidation of power?
Ylva, would you like to paraphrase?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was summarizing what we talked about, and really the question is, what is a good diet for the 21st century, and how can we equitably and sustainably improve our food markets and access to food that is affordable to everyone?
Forgive me, that'll teach me for trying to reply to someone on the chat. Well, Ylva knows, and I've spent 20 years trying to think about and work with others about trying to define sustainable diets. The answer is we can't. We know some of the criteria by which we can judge a sustainable diet. Low carbon, low embedded water, good for the soil, all the things other colleagues have referred to, but also good for health. Simpler, almost certainly, very important break as I said, having feast day foods on feast days, not every day. You want to eat meat, eat it occasionally. You know, lots of cultural rules need to be worked out and kicked in. So a sustainable diet is one which is not doing what we in Britain do and most of the rich world does, which is to seed our footprints, equitable allocation. America consumes as though there are about 3 planets, you know, that sort of stuff. It means eating less. It means not having packaged foods, all of which is almost impossible. You can't get foods unless you get it through packaging. Well, it's hard to do that. So the struggles are about trying to change the processes which stop us having sustainable diets. But if I had 10 seconds with a minister, and I did once asked about this, I'd say, well, it's healthy, environmentally sound, socially just, and decent, equitable flows of the money from it. So if I buy it, not just the retailer making fortunes out of it.
Thank you, Tim. I put the same question to Lynne.
Yeah, great. I mean, sustainable diets, I think, we have such a long way to go in this country, but eating less and better meat and dairy, far less meat and dairy and better, which means more veg, which means more opportunities for more horticulture locally, which is, it can only be a great thing in terms of sustainable diets. But I think in terms of like the systems to enable this, we need to be investing in the enablers, which is like, how do we support businesses to collaborate? You know, if you think about our food supply chains, for so long we've been thinking about them as these kind of linear, food just goes along it, waste gets chucked out the other end, there's no circularity in it. And I think leaving that kind of thing up to the market, it just doesn't work. It needs to be thought about in terms of a commons. How can we collectively build our commons of infrastructure that's going to enable us to put more circularity into our economy, and stop having this kind of one-way ticket to the death of our planet.
Thanks. Jamie.
On the same question or on a different question?
Yes, please.
Ylva, do you mind just sort of recapping on what the synopsis of that question was?
Yeah, we're talking about sustainable diets, which is a really big topic. So really, what is a good diet for the 21st century, keeping in mind the discussions we've had so far, and that kind of specifically the equitable and sustainably production and consumption of food, access to food.
Sure. I guess, you know, the piece that I'll add to this then is just more on the sustainable consumption side. So we're looking at us as consumers, and the impact that the way in which our diets have on the planet itself. You know, I've given some of those top line figures on the impacts of food waste, but across Europe, you know, 50% of post-farm gate food waste is happening within households. So, you know, we as individuals have to take some accountability on how we can reduce the amount of food waste that we're having within homes, and whether this is through utilizing technology, changing habits, things like this. This is you know, intrinsic to into having these planetary diets and these carbon neutral diets, is by reducing our own food waste. You know, that's echoes similar things that Tim has said there, which is about eating less. You know, eating less also means wasting less as well. So yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot that can be taken out from this, from just that personal reduction of food waste within our own homes.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And Michelle.
Could you repeat the question one more time, please?
What does a good diet look like in the 21st century?
Oh, okay. Well, being plant-based myself for 20 years, it's going to be clear what I'm going to say.
Fair enough. I am keen to move on. I wanted to give everyone a round on that, but I think that's pretty clear. Should we move? I'm really keen, and I've got an eye on the clock here. It's 9 minutes to, and I'd really like to bring in a question now on climate, if I may, and we can come to you first, to be fair there, Michelle. So Ylva, did you want to put that across?
Yeah, sure. So this is quite a broad question again. So the food debate often seems to circle around sort of the bottom-up personal choices versus top-down government policy, such as taxes, essentially consumption versus production, which we've touched on a little bit. So what is your view on where the balance of influencing change should be? Where do we start? Michelle?
If you could just unmute yourself, please. There we go.
Yeah, my internet cut out ever so slightly, and so I was just getting a blank screen. So I'm going to need you to repeat that again. Sorry.
That's absolutely fine. We're talking about the dichotomy between the bottom-up personal choices versus the top-down government policy, including such as taxes. So essentially consumption versus production, and what your view is on where the balance of influencing change should be.
My personal opinion is really from the bottom up, because let's take, you know, veganism. You know, look what's happened over the last few years. You know, when I became a vegan or plant-based, you know, 20 odd years ago, I couldn't get half the things that are on sale now. And that's because, you know, everybody has made personal choices, and through those personal choices there's become a shift now. You can go into the supermarkets now and you can see, you know, that they're selling the food that people want.
I think we might have lost Michelle there for a second. Should we go to oh no, we've got you back.
Yeah, I think the more we make these personal choices, I think, you know, we're going to see more of a shift. So we just need to get together as a people and actually, you know, we're doing it already. You know, it doesn't take you know, a rocket scientist to work that out. You know, we make our choices and everything from the top down will change. That's my personal opinion.
Love it. Thank you. I'll go to Jamie next, and then to Lynne, and then to Tim to close on that question. So Jamie.
So the question being, should it be a combination of a top down or bottom up? And, you know, I think from hearing all of the speakers today, you know, it's a combination of both. I won't try and do what Tim did and type an answer while speaking. So yeah, Tim just said, waste is systematic rather than individual failing, and of course that's true. I guess the point I'm trying to make there is we are a product of the system in which we're in, and that there sort of encompasses how we can have this bottom-up change by taking some personal accountability on our lifestyle choices. At the same time, we have to have this supplemented, in my opinion, by policy change. So at the moment, the biggest thing in my world which is happening is whether we'll have actual food waste measurement. And from my perspective, this is incredibly pertinent, but also hugely important to have this transparency and to have this accountability from big business. The numbers which Tim mentioned earlier, with 94.5% of retail consumed food coming through nine top UK retailers, just demonstrates the importance that policy like this has to actually be able to know the size of the problem from a retail perspective, but across the food system. And from that, we can then build out positive change. So this is where innovation can happen, whether it's utilizing technology, whether it's reducing supply chains. But at the moment, there isn't this transparency and there isn't this accountability. So there needs to be in a blend of a bottom-up and a top-down approach to this.
Thank you, Jamie. Just quickly to Lynne and then Tim for your replies to that one, and then we'll probably wrap.
Yeah, sure. So, as people, we're part of a system. It's a people system. Systems have emergent properties. So I don't think it's possible to separate our people system into only top down or only bottom up. In fact, just like in ecosystems, there's feedback loops in people systems. So like shoppers making choices, shoppers are voters. They're voters with their pound, but they're also voters at the ballot box. And they will, when there's a big enough number of people choosing certain policies, there's an incentive for politicians to change the way that they are doing this. At the same time, the businesses need to take more responsibility. And while the profit motive has been king for so long, the responsibility hasn't been there in a legislative way. But it's, there's a lot of precedent coming about now with the Modern Slavery Act, putting business culpability around slavery and supply chains. And then DEFRA's just done a consultation on due diligence on the risk to forests in supply chains, and businesses are calling out for these kind of things as well. So I think right now there's a huge amount of scope. We are rewriting the legislative framework of this country. We can put these things in. Businesses want it, people want it. There's huge opportunity to actually make these big changes.
Thank you very much, Lynne. And Tim.
Yeah, to build on that, what both Lynne and Jamie said, particularly, I don't think top-down versus bottom-up is particularly helpful, although I know why we discussed that. I think, as Lynne was just saying, I think it's much more about the need to get frameworks right for the world, which is actually multi-level. I'm sorry if that sounds pompous, but the food world is multi-level. There are global players. Nestle sells 2% of all the world's food. I mean, that's staggering, and wants to double it. But at the same time, local networks and short supply chains that we've been talking about on this session are also pushing in a very small way, but very important way. I mean, I'm not dismissing at all. I spent 7 years of my life as a farmer doing exactly that. So I'm totally sympathetic to that. But unless we get the frameworks right at the global level, at the regional, at the national level, at the sub-national level, at the local level. I mean, I'm on the London Food Board for London, the biggest city in Europe, and we don't have a food policy. We've actually got a strategy now, but we don't have powers. The Mayor of London doesn't have food powers. He or she ought to have, actually. The Mayor of Beijing does, the Mayor of Milan does, the Mayor of Paris has got the most exciting strategy of any city I know at the moment. we should be doing that. Birmingham should be doing that. Manchester should be doing that. The metropolitan mayors are talking with each other now. So that's subnational. Forget what the British government does or doesn't do in Whitehall. They're control freaks. They always are. That's what governments do. Britain, the Soviet Union, and the Chinese revolutionary state, Maoist, were the most centralizing states, and they still are. And yet, if you said to Boris Johnson that he's alongside the former Soviet Union or Putin as a centralizer, he'd probably be horrified. But he is. And we've got to decentralize in that way. So that, in pompous terms, is multi-level. Why shouldn't local areas think much more and have more powers about reshaping their food system? Of all things, good, semi-good things that have happened in COVID-19, is there has been a rebirth of more local solidarities. It's quite thin, actually, in fact, very thin, but nonetheless important. And the Nordic, Ylva's from the Nordic world. The Nordics are much better at this. Britain, unfortunately, our problem is that we've turned our back on our neighbours. And that's very bad indeed in terms of what you said to us, Peter, about democracy. We're trying to be, what the poets warned us against. No man is an island. Too true. We think we are. And in fact, the problem with Britain is we think we're an empire when we haven't got an empire, actually. We haven't got a navy that could protect it, even if it was the case. And all of these thoughts, my thoughts about that are in my book, Feeding Britain, which was published the week of the lockdown and sold out. It's completely sold out, and is out actually of all things. It's out today as a paperback. So
Wonderful.
if you want to see what I think, Ashish, you said you wanted to know what I think. Beg, borrow, don't steal, but get a copy of Feeding Britain, because there's a lot of stuff in there where I put it out to have discussions like this, which is why when Peter wrote his invitation, I hadn't a clue what this was about or what you were about or who's on this call. I do know Ylva. I thought I'll participate because I think this is a really big discussion we're having about democracy and food. And Britain, the sixth richest economy on the planet, hasn't a clue what it wants. That's a shocking state of affairs.
Tim, do you think that's a failure? I mean, maybe we don't want to point fingers here, but do you think that's a failure of DEFRA, or I mean, where does the blame for that?
It's a failure of our culture. I mean, it's a great question, Peter. I don't want to go into it, but I really explore that in my book.
Okay.
You can't be trite and quick in answering that enormously important and excellent question. It's our culture, our imperialist past, it's assumption that we want things cheap, or the value we want is cheap, cheap, cheap. What's cheap if it's got the blood of hidden labor, or that we're using other people's land, labor, climate, water. In my book, I show the embedded water that Britain is importing in food from water-stressed countries. And we're actually quite water-stressed in parts. You wouldn't think so. It's pouring with rain on my roof here as I speak to you. But, Kent is water-stressed. When my grandmother was from Kent, that was the orchard of Britain. We grubbed it all and said, well, we'll have French apples. And we blame the French for that. It was our government that did it. So there's a failure of democracy, Peter, which is why when you wrote, I hadn't a clue who you were. Your title of democracy is what got me interested. You're too
Wonderful.
Damn right. This is a discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. That is a really awesome note to end on there. And though obviously it's very sincere, but I feel your excitement for whatever it is. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone. So that really is nearly all we have time for. I think you heard it there. Go out and buy Tim's book for more on that. Or borrow it. So thank you all very much for such a forward-thinking conversation, and we'll be having an after party now off the record to openly chew the fat and wind down, and you're all invited. Just stay on the line. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our brilliant speakers, Jamie, Lynne, Michelle and Tim, and to Ylva our co-host, for anchoring all of you, us, in expertise, evidence and know-how. Thanks to my colleagues for working with laser focus behind the scenes to ensure smooth proceedings. And thank you for tuning in and joining us here today, or if you're picking this up later, thanks for watching. So I'll leave you with this. To build a future that thrives, we need a fresh, inclusive, equal, modern way of doing politics that benefits everyone. A new model that makes the old model obsolete. And Forward Democracy is creating a movement and a platform with exactly this vision in mind.